Now 250,000. Now, but to get 275. High, but to get 275. 3. Now 300,000. Now 3 1/4. 325. High, but to get 3 1/4. But to get 325. Now half. Now, but to get 300. And good morning. Welcome to the Mike McGavel Jones Show here at Lincoln Center in North Dallas. And we have the honor of having someone that most everybody knows if you follow baseball at all, professional baseball, and that's Eric Nadel, one of the voices that everyone has heard before. Good morning.
How are you, Mike?
I am outstanding. This is exciting for me. I've known you probably for, at least 20 years, over 20 years. We go back to the Danny Darwin Celebrity Golf Tournament and Memorabilia Auction, which was raising funds for Cook County College, which is now North Central Texas College. And what do you remember about those events?
I remember how Danny was able to pull in a lot of really big name players. You know, he was such a likable guy, such a popular guy that he didn't have any problem getting big names to show up.
Do you remember how many teams he played for?
I don't. I know the Rangers were the first team, and when I started with the Rangers in 1979, Danny was, I think he still technically qualified as a rookie. He had come up in 1978, but I think he still had rookie status in 1979.
I don't remember the number of years that he played, but it was like 16 or 18 seasons. And he pitched for Boston. He pitched for San Francisco. He pitched for the Astros.
White Sox, I remember.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember watching. We were in New York one day with a day off, and I was in a bar, and Danny was pitching for the Red Sox, and it was a nationally televised game, and he had a no-hit bid on national TV.
Wow.
And he didn't get it. I remember him throwing a one-hitter for the Rangers, too.
Yeah. Well, they called him the Bonham Bullet, and he's from Bonham, Texas. That's where he was. Right. That's where he was raised. But anyway, that was a fond time, and one of the reasons that I met you. That's how I met you, and that was very cool. Some of the honorary chairs that they had for that event were like Tom Landry. George W. Bush was the chair one year, and it just seems like he could get anybody. And it wasn't just baseball; it was football, baseball. Rodeo. He would get, those guys. It was amazing. It was an amazing time, and I've never really seen another event like that on that level that wasn't in Dallas specifically from a team perspective. This was a junior college. It was a 2-year school.
Right.
That was crazy. So you were born May the 16th, 1951, right?
True.
Brooklyn, New York.
Right.
Who was your favorite team?
Well, I was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. I actually got to go to Ebbets Field and watch the Dodgers the year I turned 6.
Yep.
And at the end of that season, they moved to Los Angeles.
Yep.
And there I was stuck without a team because we still had the Yankees, but I had already been taught to hate the Yankees since they were knocking the Dodgers off in the World Series all through the 40s and the 50s.
Yep.
So we still had the Yankees, but we didn't like them. And then when the Mets came along, in 1962, the year I turned 11, I started rooting for the Mets.
Did you?
Yeah. And that was pretty painful for the first 8 years or so.
I bet. What was home life like in Brooklyn at that time?
Well, it was a middle-class neighborhood that I lived in. My dad was a dentist. My mom was an accountant who pretty much gave up working when my sister was born. She's 3 years older than I am. But I was into every sport, both as a player and as a viewer. We played baseball, softball, stickball, punchball, all on concrete, in New York. We did have Little League fields, which we referred to as grass, which were actually just dirt and rocks. Yeah. The same way with football, we played tackle football on those dirt and rock fields. But the real bonus for somebody who was into sports, as I was the ability to go to games in all 4 of the major sports. And back then it was really inexpensive. You could get into a game for $1 with a student ID card, whether it was the Mets or the Knicks or the Rangers at Madison Square Garden. The only really tough ticket for us was the football Giants, but my dad knew a guy, and we wound up getting season tickets and went to those games. So, I would go to a game. I would guess on the average I'd go to probably 3 games a month from the time I can remember.
Wow. So you of course you loved baseball. Other sports? Did you like all other sports?
I loved them all, and I played them all. We didn't have ice rinks in Brooklyn, so we played hockey in the streets. But we played basketball, we played football, we played baseball. The one thing we didn't play that everybody plays now is soccer.
Yeah.
And we knew nothing about that.
What was your favorite football team?
Well, I was a New York Giants fan. When the Jets came, I started rooting for them too. Joe Willie was pretty magnetic.
Yeah.
So we'd go to the Jets games too. They rarely played at home on the same day. So during the football season, I was going to a game almost every Sunday, either at Yankee Stadium, where the Giants were playing back then, or at Shea.
Who was your favorite baseball player growing up?
Sandy Koufax.
Sandy Koufax.
He was a Brooklyn kid, and he was pitching for the Brooklyn Dodgers when I started rooting for them. And even after the Dodgers moved out to Los Angeles, I continued following them very closely, largely because of Sandy.
Did you meet him?
I've met him a few times. I met him at an old-timers game at the old Arlington Stadium. That was one of the biggest thrills of my life.
Yep.
And I have a photo of me with Sandy that I then mailed to him, and he signed it and sent it back. And I've had an opportunity since then to be with him on a number of occasions. He actually came to spring training with the Rangers to help out the pitchers for a couple of years when Claude Osteen was the pitching coach, who had pitched with the Dodgers at the same time as Sandy in Los Angeles. And then the weekend that I spent in Cooperstown in 2014, I made a point of getting to talk to Sandy Koufax a little bit. And in fact, he came up to me after my speech because I had made a reference to him in the speech.
Yep.
And he was kind enough to come up to me as soon as the speech was over.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned Claude Osteen. I hadn't thought of him in years and years. He lived in when I was about 9 years old, we moved to California, and we lived in Southern California. And we lived in the same town where Claude Osteen lived, and his kids were in our schools. So he was kind of like, whether you knew anything about what he was doing or not, it didn't matter. He was our Claude Osteen, so that was cool. Were you here when David Clyde was here?
No, David pitched for the Rangers. I think it started in '73. And I came to Dallas in 1976 to broadcast the Dallas Blackhawks minor league hockey games. Yep. And David, I think, had already moved on to Cleveland by then.
Yeah, he went to one of our neighboring high schools down in Houston, and
Tomball.
Yeah, and he was he just got pushed hard real fast. That was a kind of a sad situation. Of course, we attached ourselves to him because he was a big deal. And when he came to the Rangers, they really promoted it big. I got a lot of stuff I want to cover, and we only have so much time to do that. What would you say? I've got a whole list of your accomplishments. So I want to be careful about how I ask the question. I don't want to go out of order here. I would say that you have worked with some of the greatest radio guys, television guys of all time. Of course, Mark Holtz, Brad Sham, some of those guys. Tell me who was your biggest influence before those guys. Who was your biggest radio influence or broadcasting influence? And kind of how did you decide that broadcasting was going to be the route you wanted to go?
I was 7 years old, Mike, riding with my dad in his DeSoto convertible. I remember it was a weekday afternoon. My dad was on his lunch break, and we were stopped at a light, and we were listening to a Yankees game. And it dawned on me, these announcers somehow got out of work today. And I asked my dad, how did they get out of work to do this game? And he said, no, that is their work.
Yeah.
And I said, you mean they're getting paid to go to Yankee Stadium and talk about these games? And I've seen them on TV. They're eating hot dogs in the commercials. They're drinking beers. They're smoking Camels. It looks like a lot of fun. You're going to the office. In another half hour, you're going back there, and you're going to fill cavities and pull teeth. Dad, they've got a better deal than you got. Ever since then, I've wanted to do this. What really cemented my desire to do this, though, was listening when I was in high school to Marv Albert broadcasting on radio the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. He was so exciting that I would get my homework done in time to listen to every word every night. He had a pretty good gig. He didn't travel at all. He did whatever team was at home. Back in those days, the home games were not on TV. All the road games were on TV. He just did radio. So he just went to Madison Square Garden every night, and whether the Rangers or the Knicks were playing, he did that game. It was 4 or 5 games a week. I said, I want that gig. I want to be the next Marv Albert.
Wow. And what year would that have been?
That would have been in the mid to late 60s. I graduated high school in 1968, so probably from about 64 to 68.
Yeah, that's great. Did you sit at home and practice?
Yeah, I drove people crazy.
Yeah.
I would turn down the sound on the TV and my parents got me a tape recorder, a reel-to-reel tape recorder. I think when I was 13 in 1964, I would sometimes take it to the high school field.
Sure.
And do make-believe broadcasts there. Or if I went to a game that wasn't well attended, I'd go sit by myself and do make-believe play-by-play. I would do make-believe play-by-play while I was playing Stratomatic baseball or whatever other board game I was playing.
Yep.
I would be broadcasting games while I was playing them, driving people absolutely crazy.
It's hilarious that you say that. When I was about 12 years old, I used to sit up late at night in Houston and listen to WBAP and the Bill Mack show.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, you worked at WBAP as an announcer, and he had lived next door to my mother when I was a baby. And so my plan, of course, you and I talked about this. I was in radio for a while, and I used to sit up 3 hours, like 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning, and practice being Bill Mack. That was my good. I always thought I was going to be Bill Mack. And, as we talked about, things change and you end up changing directions. But I was looking at your timeline. You started with the Rangers in 79. I started my business in 79, in January of 79. You went into the Hall of Fame. Tell me about that. That was in 2012?
2014.
2014.
Yeah, the Ford Frick Award is awarded once a year to a baseball announcer. It's our equivalent of being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And on the same weekend that the players and managers are inducted, we get a chance to go up there and spend the whole weekend with them, make a speech, and enjoy all those festivities. And in 2014, the incoming class was a big one. It included Frank Thomas, Tom Glavine, Greg Maddux, Joe Torre, Tony La Russa,
wow,
Bobby Cox,
icons,
Roger Angel, maybe the most literary baseball writer of all time. And me. It was surreal. It was like, what am I doing here? The hotel that we all stay at, very exclusive hotel, and on that weekend you have to be either a Hall of Famer or an A-list celebrity to stay there.
Right.
I was staying down the hall from Billy Crystal, and Tom Brokaw was a couple of doors down from me. And it was like I had sneaked into some private club for a weekend and got away with it.
Yeah, well, you got away with it really well. We know about your early pursuits because of people like Marv Albert, which I loved listening to him. He was great. So you worked with some great people here in the Metroplex and around the United States. Who was who would you say either had the most influence on you or you just loved being with in the broadcast booth?
Well, Mark Holtz was the guy I worked with for 13 years, and he was a tremendously warm, friendly, open guy. I think it's one of the reasons people fell in love with him, in addition to the fact that he was an incredible broadcaster. And those 13 years were really, really special. But I may not have even gotten the opportunity to work with Mark, since he didn't come till 1982, my fourth year, had it not been for my very first broadcast partner here, John Miller, who went on to do Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN for many years and is still the voice of the San Francisco Giants. I was trying to make a transition from being a hockey announcer to being a baseball announcer. It's the most severe difference that you can have in play-by-play. Hockey is all about the speed and having the names and numbers completely memorized, having that phraseology on the tip of your tongue because it all happens so fast. Baseball is all about killing the time between pitches. Yep. The pacing is totally different. Baseball needs to be conversational. And John Miller, more than anybody, showed me how to do that and showed me how to use your personality on the air, which you don't need at all when you're doing a hockey game.
Sure. You're just trying to keep up.
Exactly.
What do you think is the largest or the biggest change in baseball since you've gotten involved doing the play-by-play? What do you see as the most significant change in the game?
Well, there have been so many of them, and for many, many years, I would answer this question by saying the ability of players to hit home runs to the opposite field. When I started, it was very rare that a right-handed batter hit a home run to right field. Only the biggest, strongest guys did that.
Could do it.
Now, anybody can do it. But in the last few years, there have been changes more dramatic than that. As you know, most notably the use of pitchers. The fact that starting pitchers aren't expected to even go 6 innings anymore. The way bullpens have developed, starting with Tony La Russa's use of Dennis Eckersley as a 1-inning closer in the late 80s for the Oakland A's, to the point now where we regularly see 6 or 7 pitchers in a game. That's not unusual at all. That's a tremendous change, and it's led to the length of the games changing dramatically. When I started, the average game time was about 2 hours and 35 minutes, and now it's a half hour longer. It's 3 hours and 5 minutes, and that's all dead time. That's all pitchers taking more time between pitches, batters stepping out at the plate, and all these additional pitching changes.
And now they're trying to figure out how to shorten the length.
And I think they need to. To me, it's not so much the length of the game as the rhythm of the game.
Yeah.
There is no rhythm of the game anymore because there's too much time between pitches. I think it's a serious problem, and they need to put in a pitch clock. I think it's the thing that baseball needs more than anything.
Well, they probably will.
I think this is the year. The commissioner wanted to do it last year. The players' union talked him out of it. We'll wait and see as spring training approaches whether he goes ahead and does it this year. I certainly hope he does.
So we're talking about what is the biggest difference besides the direction that they can hit? Is there anything else about, I think back about the size of players. In almost any sports, you look at the size of the players. Baseball is interesting in that you don't have to be the tallest guy. You don't have to be, you don't have to be the bulkiest guy. Like in football, I don't know how 300-pound guys run into each other like they do, and anybody get up. I can't believe the number of injuries they don't have. What do you think about the size of the players and how they're able to function?
Yeah, a lot has changed having to do with the salaries. When I started in 1979, our players had off-season jobs. They were making the same money that teachers were making. And in the off-season, they would go and sell cars, or they'd work as a substitute teacher, or they'd go work in a plant someplace. And they'd come to spring training out of shape, and spring training 6 weeks was so they could get into shape. Now they work out every single day, and even minor league players do that year-round. There was really no off-season for them in terms of conditioning. And as a result of weight training, which was completely forbidden back when I started in 1979, people thought it was bad for baseball players. They're so much bigger and stronger. Pitchers are, reaching 100 miles an hour now, whereas reaching 90 was a big deal back when I started.
Yep.
And hitters can hit the ball so much farther. And now just in the last 2 or 3 years, everybody's decided in these analytics departments that the value of the home run is so great that people should be trying to hit home runs even with 2 strikes, and it's changed the entire approach to the game of the hitters.
Sure. In anything in life, there's highs and lows. I mean, and you and I have been through all kinds of stuff over the years. What would you say is your greatest high moment in the last 40 years?
Well, there's no doubt about it. It's the moment Neftali Feliz struck out Alex Rodriguez to win the pennant for the Rangers in 2010. First time the Rangers got a chance to go to the World Series. Remember, this franchise started in 1972. It wasn't until 2010
the Washington Senators
that they won the American League pennant. That stands way above everything else. Even though I've been a part of calling 2 Nolan Ryan no-hitters, a Kenny Rogers perfect game.
Yep.
I personally called Nolan Ryan's 5,000th strikeout. Nothing compares to winning that first American League pennant in 2010. And number 2 would probably be winning the second American League pennant in 2011.
I actually had that in my notes. Of course, the first time we took on San Francisco, and that played out in 5 games, I believe.
Right.
And I was at the World Series, and that was painful. And then the next year in 7 games, and that has to be one of the most painful times for me as a baseball fan, was to see us lose to St. Louis in 7 games. And we really shouldn't have lost that game. It came down to 1 pitch. It was painful. Tell me.
Came down to 1 pitch twice in Game 6, where the Rangers had a lead and were literally 1 strike away from winning the World Series. First time a fly ball hit to deep right. Nelson Cruz didn't get there, didn't catch it, tied the game. And then the second time, Lance Berkman was at the plate for St. Louis and had a broken bat little bloop that fell in center field. People forget about that. Everybody focuses on the Nelson Cruz play, as they should. He probably should have caught that ball. But the Cardinals were totally lucky to tie the game the second time on a little broken bat bloop hit. That was by far the most painful thing that I've gone through as a baseball announcer. And honestly, I don't think I've recovered from it since, and I don't think Ranger fans have.
You know, in preparation for this show today, I went back and I just looked at some historic facts about the Rangers, and it brought it all back to me. You know, as a Rangers fan, it just kind of made me ill, just rethinking it. And it can only be multiplied 1,000 times with you being the play-by-play guy. I can only imagine.
I've never watched a replay of it since that night. I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
If I'm watching some sort of a show and they start referring to it, I turn it off.
Yeah.
I have never heard my call since that night when we replayed it on the post-game show.
Yeah.
And I don't want to.
had to be a multiple drink night.
I didn't sleep that night. The night of Game 6.
Yeah.
I did not sleep. We went back, it was like we were all in a coma.
Yep.
Went back, and I didn't want to watch highlights on TV, so I had the TV on, but I didn't want to see ESPN or any show that was going to show the highlights of the thing. It was very strange. And then we still had a chance to win in Game 7 and took a 2-0 lead in the top half of the first inning, only to have the Cardinals come back and tie it in the bottom of the first inning with, of course, David Freese hitting a 2-run double to tie the game. And then the Cardinals went on and won rather easily from that point on. But all the things that had to happen for the Rangers to not win that World Series, it almost seemed like fate. The key to the whole thing was there being a rainout on a night when it didn't rain, where Major League Baseball fired a preemptive strike expecting rain delays and canceled Game 6, which enabled the Cardinals in Game 7 to start Chris Carpenter rather than Jaime Garcia or some other far inferior starting pitcher.
Sure.
All of these things conspired to ultimately give the Cardinals the chance to win.
There must be a grassy knoll in San
Something
Francisco.
like that.
And
now,
in
San
St.
Francisco,
Louis.
I just thought they were probably a better team. The Rangers were in the World Series for the first time. Just playing in the World Series that year was like baseball in heaven. That was good enough. We didn't need to win the World Series that year. The following year, we needed to win.
We should have won it. Well, and I think everybody thought we'd win it. It was just kind of a given. It's going to happen. And
I think the Rangers were a much better team.
In the last 40 years, of course, Sandy Koufax previously was your favorite player, and probably still is your favorite player. But let's talk about the last 40 years with the Rangers and with that era of baseball from 79 to now. Who would you say is your favorite player?
Well, there are the 3 Hall of Famers who stand out above all the others: Pudge Rodriguez, Nolan Ryan, and now Adrian Beltre, who's a certain Hall of Famer too. Sure. And the thing about Pudge and Adrian that was so special is that they played with a smile on their face.
Yep.
They had a certain flamboyance, a certain charisma that even most great players don't have. So if you take those 3 guys out of the mix, since they're almost in an otherworldly category, my favorite guy to watch was Julio Franco, because he was such an amazing hitter who could hit anybody's fastball at 100 miles an hour up until he was 50 years old, despite the fact he was using the heaviest bat in the league and holding it way up over his head in a ridiculous, awkward stance. I just loved watching him swing the bat. So I'd go with Julio Franco as my dark horse choice there.
Who would you say, from a personal perspective, not necessarily baseball perspective, but maybe both, I don't know, who would you say is the most underrated, nice person in your era of being a Rangers play-by-play guy? So if I said, hey, we're gonna, it's our last meal on Earth, okay, and you wanted to, now you may want to sit down with Julio Franco or whoever, but who would you say would be like that super nice guy? We're going to save one seat for the nicest guy you ever met in baseball. Who would that be?
Well, there's a lot of options there.
Yeah.
We've been blessed, with really good guys to play for the Rangers over the years. Back in 1979 when I started, I was about the same age as most of the players. So those were the guys I was friendliest with. Buddy Bell, Jim Sundberg. The following year, Charlie Huff came along.
Sure.
If there was only one seat at the table, I would probably go for Charlie because he'd make me laugh through the whole meal.
Yeah, well, you got to have humor.
Yeah.
And you and I really came along about the same time. You're a little older than I am, but I'm an older soul than most people. And I started collecting baseball cards in the 60s. And so probably around, I played Little League in California. It was a big deal for me at the time because I was an awkward kid anyway. But I lived in Northern California, near San Francisco, for about a year. My dad was transferred a lot, but I just remember playing Little League. My dad was the coach. He was the manager of the team. I played third base. Brooks Robinson was my guy, and made the All-Star team. So it was just that was one of those highlights when you're a kid. But then, just like you, I got to meet a lot of my idols, and as you know, I would do a lot of charity auctions, and you do a lot of charity auctions. And I remember Brooks Robinson came here because Mark Cuban was having the Heroes baseball deal, and Brooks Robinson was a guest. And I met him, and we got to shake hands and all that. Of course, the funny thing is we have perceptions of people, and then we meet them, and it's either excellent or very disappointing, right?
Sure.
Now, who would you say, if you can think of one, who most impressed you that you kind of had a perception, but then when you met him, you went, wow, that's a pretty special person?
I'm not going to go with a player here. I'm going to go with an announcer. It's Vin Scully.
Oh, yeah.
He is the god of
Dodgers.
Baseball announcing.
Absolutely.
And he is the nicest, most humble person who ever lived. He treats all of us broadcasters as an equal, whether we're doing Major League Baseball or Class A baseball. Mm-hmm. He's unbelievably warm and giving. And I don't know that there's any other person in any other profession who is so universally acknowledged as the very best ever
and loved
to do that job.
Yep.
If you asked all 60 Major League Baseball radio announcers who is the best ever at this, all 60 would say Vin Scully. I guarantee you it would be unanimous. If you ask them who's the second best, you might get 60 different answers.
That's correct.
For number one, you'd get 60 votes for Vin Scully. And here's a guy he just thinks he's like any other guy.
Yeah.
And Nolan Ryan's very much the same way.
Really?
Even though he's the strikeout king of all time, he's just a regular guy and wants to be treated like just a regular guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a really neat piece hanging in my kitchen that I look at Nolan every time I go make a pot of coffee. I see Nolan right next to me, and he wrote the nicest inscription of anything anyone has ever written to me on that particular piece. And I've got Nolan Ryan baseballs, and it's really funny. And you remember because you called the 5,000 strikeout game. You remember they had 5,000 strikeout poster. They had a poster.
Right.
Well, that I had gone to the old stadium when I was young. I don't even see. This would have been in '88. I probably went '88, and it was the Ranger Wives Association. I went by myself. I don't know why I was there. I was like 28 years old, and they offered the opportunity to do the opening lineup for an upcoming Rangers game, and I bought it, which was crazy. So I went to an auction of the Wives Association in the open stadium at the old Arlington Stadium, and I bought that right. And so I show up at the stadium. I'm just a kid, and I've got Chuck Morgan standing behind me. I've got a great picture of Chuck. We both look very, very young, very young. And so they wanted to test out, the microphone, and they said, well, why don't, and I said, well, I've been in radio a little bit. I said, I can read. And they said, well, why don't you read this, and just so we can make sure we're good and ready to go. And I said, okay. And it was the Kansas City Royals were in town, and Bo Jackson was playing, and it was that genre. This would have been around '89. When was the 5,000 strikeout?
'89.
Okay. Well, they said, read this, and Chuck, one of his assistant guys, he puts the script in front of me, and I'm literally doing the stadium announcing now. They said, read this. I did a commercial for 5,000 strikeout night.
Wow.
And it was like now somewhere there's a recording of me announcing the starting lineup. And I just remember Steve Buechele was playing, and there was a certain way you're supposed to say his name. That's the only thing I totally butchered was how you say his name in the starting lineup. And that's when a phone call came in from somewhere and they said, who just said that? Because they couldn't figure out who it was. That was probably the end of having open mic night at Arlington Stadium. And you were probably sitting right there going, I don't know what just happened. But that was pretty fun. So in 2002, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you played basically yourself in The Rookie. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And that was Dennis Quaid's movie about the West Texas coach. He was a high school teacher.
Jim Morris.
Yes. Yeah. And then he came in, he was upset his whole life about the fact that he never got to go and do what he really wanted to do, which was play baseball.
Right. He had hurt his arm.
Yeah. And so tell me about that experience.
Yeah, it was fortunate for me and for Ranger fans that when Jim Morris was called up to the big leagues for the first time by the Tampa Bay, then Devil Rays, his debut was in our ballpark, which at that time I think was called the ballpark in Arlington. And it was great for him, too, being from Texas, that he made his debut in Texas. Well, when they put the movie together, they realized that if they just used the calls that were on TV or on radio that night, every time a player's name was mentioned, they were going to have to pay royalties to that player.
Right.
So they called me and asked me if I would come down to Austin and go into a studio and recreate all of the play-by-play on the plays that they wanted without using players' names.
Really?
So that they didn't have to pay royalties to all these people. The only player who they were going to pay other than Jim Morris was Royce Clayton, because he was the batter who Jim Morris struck out in his first big league appearance.
Right.
First batter he faced was Royce Clayton. He struck him out. So they were willing to pay Royce and had an actor play the part of Royce Clayton. But all of the other players weren't going to get paid. So as they set the thing up, they were showing highlights of the game while Jim Morris was sitting in the bullpen and then was warming up in the bullpen. And my calls would be in the background, but I had to redo the calls without players' names. So I had to do a lot of rewriting. And it was a very interesting day because they really didn't know enough about baseball broadcasting to have any sort of a decent script. They had all of these things written for me, which were extremely awkward and things that an announcer wouldn't say. So I basically had to rewrite my entire part and then record it. And when I was done, John Lee Hancock, the director, said, while you're here, maybe you could help us out because we have a bunch of lines written for the high school announcer from back when Jim Morris was in high school. They probably need to be rewritten as well. Would you take a look at those and rewrite them? And I did. I took a look at those and I rewrote those as well.
Did you get a writing credit?
I didn't get a writing credit, but what they did for me was they gave me a SAG and AFTRA credit,
nice,
which I wasn't expecting. I'm not a member of either of those organizations, and the deal I made with them was a flat fee. This is what we'll pay you for the day, which was more than acceptable for me. And then about 6 months after the movie came out, I started getting checks from SAG-AFTRA, and I still get them. It's
yeah.
$8, and you know, 4 times a year I get it, a little bit of mailbox money.
Starbucks.
And I'm pretty sure that's as a result of the fact that I was willing to, do some rewriting for them.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's a great story on top of that. Wasn't that a Disney movie?
It was.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, that's cool. And I remember when it came out. I rarely go to a movie when it first comes out, but that was one of them I did go to see when it first came out. Who was I'm moving around a lot. Who has been your favorite Rangers manager?
Well, I think Ron Washington was my favorite guy to deal with. He was just such a relaxed, low-key, warm, and friendly guy. They've all been interesting in their own way. I probably learned more about baseball from Bobby Valentine than I did from any other announcer.
Is Bobby still managing?
No, Bobby now is the athletic director at a Sacred Heart University in Connecticut, and does a lot of different things. I learned a lot from Buck Showalter as well. He could be tough to deal with at times, a little bit testy.
He'd been with the Yankees.
He'd been with the Yankees prior.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from Jeff Bannister, too. Jeff was the manager during the time that all this new analytic stuff came in, and he was ahead of the curve on all that stuff. So, he was able to explain things to me like exit velocity and launch angle
Nice.
Before, other people knew, what it even was. But, I've enjoyed working with all of them. None of them have been all that difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't know how those guys sleep at night with all the pressure on them.
They probably don't.
I see all the work they put into. Many of our managers, Valentine, Showalter included, if we had a day game after a night game, they would sleep in their office.
Sure.
Because when the game was over, they would want to watch the game again and start preparing stuff for the next day and just grab a few hours of sleep on their couch. Those guys work so hard. Fans have no idea how much goes into it from the coaches and the managers.
Yeah, I can see that. That's a good lead-in to my question for you. And what do you think is the hardest thing about being a broadcaster?
I think
in sports specifically.
Well, baseball, I think, is different from the other sports because it's every day. And
it's grind.
This is in no way a hard job. Let me preface it by saying that. I've had hard jobs in college. I worked in a warehouse moving refrigerators and air conditioners around. Yes. I delivered stuff to people's houses, walking up 4 floors, lugging a dishwasher in a non-air conditioned walk-up. I worked one summer as a letter carrier, in really hot, steamy weather. But the hardest thing about this job is being on every single night, having a smile in your voice every single night, whether or not I had a bad day, whether or not I had a decent night's sleep, because maybe we got into the town we were playing in at 6 in the morning and I had to be at the ballpark at 3. I've got to sound on the air like there's no place in the world I'd rather be. That's the hardest part of it.
I found this very interesting. Ruben Sierra. Was he the reason you learned Spanish?
He was the reason. When he got called up to the Rangers in 1986, he was instantly the best player on the team by far.
Oh, I loved him. I still have an autographed bat. Yeah.
Well, it seemed that 2 or 3 times a week he would be the star of the game, and we couldn't interview him. Teams didn't carry translators back then. They do now. The Rangers did have a Spanish-speaking trainer, and they had a couple of bilingual players on the team. Jose Guzman was the guy who would usually serve as the translator for Ruben, but he wasn't always available. The trainer usually wasn't available, so we couldn't talk to him. So I resolved to learn Spanish. Now, it took me 4 years before I actually, got off my butt and started taking lessons and learning. But he was the major reason. And we also knew the Rangers had been very active in signing players in Latin America. We knew Pudge Rodriguez was on the way, Juan Gonzalez was on the way, and a host of other Latin American players who probably wouldn't be speaking English when they got here.
Yeah, I remember Roberto Clemente was one of my favorite players. And when we were living in the San Francisco area, I had already fallen in love with Willie Mays. I mean, Willie Mays was my guy all through my youth. I just loved Willie Mays. And Brooks Robinson was my base love. Because that's the guy you wanted to be. If you wanted to third base, you wanted to be Brooks Robinson at that time in the early 70s. But I just remember Willie Mays to the point that when the San Francisco made it. They were either in I don't think they were in the World Series, but they were trying to make the World Series. It was just right on the edge of winning the pennant. And I just remember that I'm in a public school in Benicia, California, which is outside of the San Francisco immediate area. And they literally broadcast the game in the classrooms so people could hear, because this was at the end of Willie's, kind of late. I mean, it was kind of like, this may be Willie's last chance. That's the kind of the way they were looking at it. And it was Willie Mays, and McCovey was playing and all that. But I just remember how weird that was that they were broadcasting the San Francisco Giants baseball game in the classroom, because you don't see that anymore.
That's remarkable. I
What do you think about, I got several things, and we're limited on time, but I want to cover some things. So in 1991, you were inducted into the Texas Baseball Hall of Fame. You received the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Association Texas Sportscaster of the Year 7 times. You won the Associated Press Award for Best Play-by-Play in Texas 3 times. Is that right?
Something like that.
Something like that. You've had a historic career. You've had now. Is this true that the Rangers offered you a lifetime deal to announce for the Rangers?
They did. I put limits on it at the time.
Yeah.
It was actually supposed to be a series of long-term deals that would automatically, the extensions would automatically kick in. That's kind of the way the thing was designed. We're at a stage of my career right now where I don't want another long-term deal to kick in.
Mm-hmm.
So in a couple of more seasons, I'll probably start operating on year-to-year deals as I decide, how long I want to continue doing this. And most important to me now is how many games I want to do. Most guys, when they get into their 70s, cut back dramatically on the number of games they do.
Because of the travel.
Right. Well, not so much the travel as just you want to do other things with your life.
Really?
That you can't do in the summer if you're broadcasting 162 baseball games. So this coming season, I'll have, I think, 23 games off. And I'd like to have more. And in 2 years, when we're at a point where the extension would kick in, I'll probably start taking 40 to 50 games off and see how that feels. And then who knows, every now and then announcers get to the point where they just don't want to do it at all. It's still a lot of fun, but as with anything, you can get burnt out. And as I said, you want to do other things with your life. I'm closing in on 70 years old, and, if you knew how long you were going to live, it'd be a lot easier to make that decision.
Yeah, I understand. Have you ever spoken to Vince Scully about why he quit, when he quit? What made that decision for him? It was
a family decision. He wanted to be able to spend more time with his many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And, it had a lot to do with wanting to spend the time with his wife.
Yeah.
I mean, however many years.
How old is he now?
He's 90 now.
Oh, my gosh.
He worked until he was 88.
Yeah.
I believe.
I remember when I was watching when he made the announcement and when he did his last game, and I'm just like, it almost hurt as a fan of broadcasting, and of course, and to be with that team that long was incredible.
Yeah, he started in 1951 with the Brooklyn Dodgers. That's the year I was born. Mm-hmm. And, in his last several years, he didn't travel at all. He just did home games.
Yeah.
And some guys do that, as they age. I would take a different approach. I love the travel. I have friends in all of the cities we go to.
You've got a meal waiting for you.
I've got meals waiting. I've got favorite restaurants, bars, music clubs.
Yep.
I like being in all the other stadiums. When I take games off, I mostly take home games off. For one thing, it gets me out of the Texas summer.
Sure.
And it gets me to see friends that I otherwise wouldn't get an opportunity to see. I mean, I wouldn't travel to Cleveland.
Why?
Or Detroit.
That's the last World Series that I went to. I did go watch the Cleveland and the Cubs game.
And maybe it's not a vacation destination, but I enjoy going there for 3 or 4 days every year. I get to see my friends there. Same with Detroit. Same with Minneapolis, and all these other places that I wouldn't be vacationing in.
Pick those games over the next 3 or 4 years. Just pick those games. Those are games you definitely want to do those.
I want to do as many road games as I can. Even the cities we go to multiple times, the ones within our division, those are my favorite cities. Yeah. Seattle is my favorite city. San Francisco is probably my second favorite. We get to go to Southern California 3 times, and we go to Houston 3 times, which is a nice, easy trip.
Sure. Got a couple of things, and we're going to wrap up. And this has been a great interview for me. I don't know if it's been good for you.
It's been fun.
It's gone by pretty quick. We've only gone 45 minutes. We've almost covered your whole life. I know you've been married a long time. How long have you been married?
32 years.
That's impressive. Anybody that's in sports, in broadcasting, or in a profession that travels that much to make it that long is quite a statement.
Yeah, my wife Jeannie is very independent. She has her own life. She has things that she likes to do. She's not particularly into sports or baseball. She listens to the games at times just to figure out what time I'm going to be home or what time I'm going to meet her someplace.
I want to talk about your book, okay? And Zach, do we have, I don't know if we have this, but I'll put it here. I don't know if you can see it very well. I'm going to put it right there in front of the screen. There we go. Tell me about your book.
Yeah, it's called Lim-Eric, Lim-Eric. We started writing limericks this year, Matt Hicks and Jared Sandler and I, just as a way of amusing ourselves during the game. We're always looking for offbeat things to do since there is so much dead time in a baseball game. We started doing this in late April, doing a limerick of the day. We would read it in the 8th inning. It would give people a reason to stick around and listen if a game wasn't a close game, or tune back in. And I realized about a month later that at the end of the year I was going to have well over 100 limericks. We were having listeners send limericks in.
Yep.
And so a friend of mine said, I got to introduce you to this guy, Arthur James. He's a local illustrator, and he's a real baseball fan.
Yep.
And I bet he could do some beautiful illustrations for you. And next thing you know, Arthur and I were sitting down, and I gave him a few of the limericks, and he did these little sketches which were just unbelievable. And I said, let's do this thing. And we put a book together, and I wrote an extra 30 or 40 limericks that are not about baseball, that are about other sports. They're about music. They're about my favorite places to visit. And then we have about 30 limericks that are written by other people, written by listeners, written by writers like Evan Grant and some of my musician friends. And, the limericks combined with Arthur's, marvelous illustrations, make up a pretty neat book.
So we're going to, and we just put up on the screen.
I saw you had the Amazon link to it.
So we're going to send folks to Amazon. It'd be a great gift for someone, whether you're a baseball fan or not. If you are, that's even better. But we want to make sure that they are able to go to Amazon and check out your book. And you brought me one, so I'm excited about that. And I noticed you have some folks that have endorsed the book, and that you got Nolan on here. You got Joe Buck and Ken. Is it Levine?
Levine. He's an Emmy-winning writer of MASH.
Cheers,
and
Frasier, and Ron Washington, of course, former manager. So that's really cool. I've got about 3 things I want to cover, and Zach, I promise I'll move through this.
We'll make it happen.
Okay. The first thing is the ballpark. It seems like we just built this ballpark. Now, I'm sure there's old nuances to it. I mean, I love I love this park because it looks like an old park. That's that's why that one in Baltimore and some of these others, and I've been to that one as well. That old feel, it kind of gives you that. Unlike football, which is really trying to be all new glitz, glam, and all that, baseball is like the standard bearer for history.
Right, there's so much tradition.
There is.
Yeah.
So tell me, did we need the new stadium?
Well, we needed the new stadium because it is so hot in the summer. It's so unpleasant out there. Fans either suffer out there in the heat or they don't go.
Yep.
Players suffer in the heat.
Texas is brutal.
Pitchers do not want to pitch for the Rangers because they're having to pitch too many nights like that. Broadcasters don't want to come here and do games because once we open the windows, our booths are not air conditioned.
Right.
If it's 100 degrees outside, it's 90 something in our booth.
Yep.
So it's going to be a lot more pleasant for everybody. And as wonderful as our current stadium is, and I love it, there are always things you can improve upon. And I've been in the new stadium in Globe Life Field in whatever form it is right now, and you already have a feel for the fact that it's going to be more straight up and down than the current stadium is. So
better
you're going to
seats.
feel like you're closer to the field. The sight lines are going to be better, as well as improvements, I'm sure, in the way the concessions are done, the way the walkways are done. All of those things, they always learn things from the previous park. And maybe most important is the fact that the seats are going to be angled in more. As you go down the foul lines, you'll be looking in more directly toward home plate and the pitcher's mound.
Okay, now I'm okay with the new stadium.
And not to mention the fact that when it's 100 degrees, they'll be able to close the roof.
No, you got me at it's going to be more comfortable.
Okay.
Because and I've gone out and I've had different seats. I've gone out with family members when they say, well, we bought tickets for the weekend. I said, where are you? And they go, out in the field. And I'm going, oh, because, I'm one of those guys that if I'm not on the first 10 rows or something, I don't want to go. I just don't. Now, I've sat with the Astros broadcast booth in the last 2 or 3 years. It's funny, we have common friends. And you mentioned, and I'm going to do a shout out to Ronnie Conger because I've known Ronnie for a long time, and you have too. He actually came to my auction school like in 1993 or 1994. about a little after you and I had met, and Ronnie, of course, used to be with Dr. Pepper and was a great sports memorabilia guy. He used to do great presentations. In fact, he presented me with a Nolan Ryan cutout for the auction school, which was pretty cool. But so Ronnie's a friend, and then McElhaney, that is part of the broadcast booth for the Astros. He actually came to the auction school about 3 years ago. And so then I have the standing invitation to go sit with the Astros when they come to town. That's not necessarily the team I want to be sitting with, but, I appreciated that. And, of course, then they won the World Series, and that's all lore. I keep waiting for us to get back. So I covered that. I want to just the last thing is, there's two things. Spring training's coming up. When do you report?
The first broadcast is February the 23rd. In the last few years, they've been starting a week earlier. It enables them to have more days off during the season by lengthening the number of days of the season, but obviously not increasing the number of games. So it's coming up pretty fast. February 23rd will be the first game.
This is Sunrise?
Surprise, Arizona. It's a distant suburb of Phoenix.
Yeah. How far out is it?
Well, from downtown, it's about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
You can make it in half an hour late at night. It's in the northwest corner of the Phoenix metropolitan area. It seems like you're halfway to Las Vegas when you get out there.
That's not hard to do. Charlie Pride still come out?
He still does.
Does he?
Yep. Hasn't missed a year.
Yeah. He's pretty neat. He's a neat guy. I run into him for breakfast quite a bit here in North Dallas. And then the final thing that I want to mention is FanFest is coming up. And I know the 2019 version of FanFest, I believe, is January the 26th. Is that right?
Yeah, it's out at the ballpark at Globe Life Park in Arlington, Saturday the 26th. And in combination with that, I know there are going to be some events at Fort Worth at Texas Live. For people who haven't been out there yet, you got to check this place out.
You have to.
It's really well done. This assortment of bars and restaurants around a central area that has huge TVs carrying all kinds of games. It's really a lot of fun.
Texas Live, they did that totally right. The first time I was there was right after they opened, and I'm just like, wow. If every sports area could figure out a venue like that, there'd be more people going to everything, and I've gone to some Cowboy games, and just you can get on the rickshaw or whatever, or the Easy Go kart, and just they'll take you straight down there. It's a really awesome setup.
Yeah, I've been very impressed by the way they put that thing together.
Well, Eric, you have lived a wonderful life.
I've been very fortunate. I've been blessed.
You're the George Bailey of Texas Rangers broadcasting. I appreciate you being here so much. It means a great deal to me and the folks that join us on the show. And enjoy working as long as you want to. I hope you're blessed with that ability. And if you quit tomorrow, you could write 2 or 3 books, I'm sure. But people love to hear you on the radio, and to us, you will always be the voice of the Texas Rangers Baseball Club. So, thank you for being here. Any final thoughts from you?
No, just thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Good. Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Mike McGavel Jones Show here at North Dallas at the Lincoln Center, and we appreciate you being with us so very, very much. We look forward to being with you again next week, and we'll surprise you with another new guest. We'll talk to you later, and we bid you adieu.